I love seeing people learn something new and realizing that they have this gift that they maybe didn't believe they had.
Hey everyone, I'm Amanda from Seattle. We've got Whitney from Minneapolis and Aaron from Nashville, and we are here today on another episode of The Edit Weekly. And today we are going to be interviewing Whitney. We've heard some feedback that y'all want to get to know us a little bit more too. So today is the day to learn more about Whitney, her path to photography, what got her into the wedding industry. And at the end, we're going to talk about what it is she would do differently now that she is where she's at and all the experiences she's had. So here we go. Okay, Whitney. Let's kind of just dive into it. What was your path towards photography and like the wedding industry? We're going to start you off there.
So, back in the 90s when I was in high school, we had film camera, which it was expensive to buy film, but I would me and my friends would dress up like glamour shots and I'd take photos of them. I loved it. I still I can remember the images in my head. But I went to college, I studied art, always loved art, was going to be an art teacher, did photography courses. And, I loved my photography teacher. He was one of those people where they really believed in me, which I think was such an important thing, to get started. And I love that. And I think that was part of my inspiration to continue with photography. Mm-hmm. So I graduated, had my degree. I had a job offer to teach art in an elementary school.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, and I was living in Georgia and I said, you know what? I'm just going to move to Nashville and wing it.
Oh, wow. I did not know that about you.
Yes. So I randomly found a place to stay. I was I'm going to start at Wolf Camera, which is, lab that is not around anymore. Started selling cameras, met a photographer who ran a studio and he hired me. And that was really how I had not thought about doing weddings until I started working with that studio and learned a lot of traditional portrait posing and lighting, which I feel gave me a really good foundation to then be more creative, and eventually just started wanting to do my own thing. And so I just began doing weddings the way I wanted to. And back then that was 2000, 2 or 3. So it was a while back, and it was before, it was mostly male dominated when I started. Yeah. Most of the wedding photographers were male, was very traditional. And I did more creative photography, which is very common now. We see so much creativity, which I love. So I was kind of a little bit different and started attracting clients that appreciated that. So that was the short version of how I got started.
That's awesome. Well, and then, okay, so from there, I assume then you left the studio then to kind of do your own thing, right? Is that how that kind of progressed?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, so what did that look like?
It was, there are some things I should not share on air, but I will tell you, I will say this. I proved a lot of the male photographers wrong. Mm-hmm. So I actually had a lot of pushback when I first started. And, I don't like to badmouth anyone, but just to give you an example, just in general, how things were in Nashville, when I would go to the camera store that was there, they would always treat me like I needed a lesson. Or I would ask, I'd want to rent a lens and they would say, I don't think you need that lens. It's too much.
Oh, wow.
And eventually my husband, Peter, started working with me. So I taught him how to shoot, and he worked the books, did all kind of the organizational stuff. And we would go in together, and they would talk to him and they would say, what, and he would be like, no, my wife is the primary shooter. And he had no qualms in saying that and like saying, you know, this is her business. I help her. And
That's
I appreciated that. So
yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, and then I was gonna say, you like grew from there though, right? Like it wasn't just the two of you for very long. Like how did it go from there? Cause I know that you ended up having like not a studio space, but like you became a studio.
Yes. So when you sent me the questions, I really started to think about what was it that really inspired me to start an associate studio. And I really think it was this desire for community, which has been woven through everything I've done in business. Whenever I start something new, I'll start it by myself. And then I love collaborating. So I end up just kind of forming communities around myself, sometimes not even on purpose. And that's what happened with starting doing associates. I also love to teach, so that my degree to be an art teacher really has come in handy. And so I would maybe teach a photography class, or, you know, I decided, hey, I'm going to teach Peter how to photograph this wedding so he can work with me. And then, you know, I have a friend that's interested in photography. Hey, why don't you come, you know, I'll teach you how to do this. And then, hey, why don't you start working for me? So it was always, because I loved collaborating. I loved, and I still love, I love seeing people learn something new and realizing that they have this gift that they maybe didn't believe they had. And almost everybody that worked with us, they started off saying, oh, I'm not really a photographer, or I don't know what I'm doing. Can I really do this? And I absolutely love seeing people discover that part of themselves, because I think it's something that's in all of us. I think creativity and imagination, no matter what path you take when you do that, we all have it. And so being able to see that kind of come to life I love it. I love it.
I love that you're all about community, because you didn't know this when we formed the podcast group of the three of us and Chris behind the scenes. I reminded you that December, I actually don't know what month, but at some point in 2010, probably, I had owned a camera for just a handful of months, and I had been taking photos, and people had started asking me, you know, to take photos for them. And I thought, okay, maybe I'll make this a thing. Anyway, I know your experience from these Nashville camera stores, because it wasn't just you, it was me and friends of mine. We've all had the conversations about how we hated walking in there because we knew that we were going to feel like less than. But I thought there's gotta be somebody out there that's willing to help, right? So I Googled Nashville wedding photographers, and you popped up. And I emailed you all and said, hi, I'm wondering if I can, I'm trying to start a photography business. I'm wondering if I could take you to coffee and pick your brain. And your sweet husband, Peter, emailed back, and he said, we're so flattered. We love that you're wanting to start this. We actually get this request often. Why don't you come to our photographer meetup that we host? Because at the time, and I don't know how long you had been hosting it at this point. So when did you start hosting that?
I do not even remember.
So I don't know if you've been doing it for a while or if it was brand new, but you invited me, and it was so nerve-wracking walking into like a room full of photographers, and you don't know who's new and who's seasoned and who's friends and who's not, but everybody was so welcoming. And from that point on, for many years, the Nashville photography community is what built my business. Like the education and the referrals and just the camaraderie, I still feel like it's probably unmatched. And you guys were such a big part of that. So I can sit here and say that I might not be a photographer today had Peter not invited me to that group that really got me into the community of helpers. So I couldn't wait to say that on this podcast episode, that like,
I love that.
Yeah, I'm kind of here because of Whitney and Peter.
Oh my gosh. And so like, Erin shared this, just a few months ago, and I got like chills and choked up, and I just got chills and choked up again because there's, when you look at the world at large, and there's this, and I don't know if it's a stereotype or it's something that we've learned as women, that we always have to like compete with each other. And we see in business, and it's so easy to see someone doing well and then just compare yourself. And, there is like so much room for all of us. And when we decide that we're going to build each other up, and then when one of us, whoever that us is, and this isn't exclusive to women, but if one business does well, then they're going to help the entire community. They're going to help, the entire industry. And so there's so much we can learn from each other if we're willing to share and encourage each other and like cheer each other on.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's what I get to do. Like now when I'm working with Swift Galleries is cheer on these photographers who are doing their business. And, I absolutely love doing it. And so that just, it means so much to hear that. And
I love that.
I think it's a testament to just, you don't have to like host a group or anything, but just like making one or two connections with people is absolutely so important. And it keeps you from feeling lonely, and it just can make your business grow. That's a really, really huge thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you were saying, you felt like taking on associate photographers, like you wanted to create a community too. So going back to that, and the business that you had, how was that all structured? Like, I'm sure we've got people that are watching and listening and reading the newsletter that are in a similar situation, whether they are already in a studio and they're making it work, or they're thinking, hey, I like this, I want to expand. So can you talk a little bit about really what that looked like? Were they employees? How did that work out? How did you all work together? How did you figure out who did what? I'm really curious about like that part of where your business went.
I will absolutely go into that. However, I do want to say that starting an associate studio because you want community just because of that is a terrible idea. So when I say what I would do different if I start over, would I do an associate studio? Maybe not. But with that being my main goal, no.
Fair.
Exactly.
So I am going to share with you some things that I've learned and some things that we did that I think worked really well, and will hopefully help, if you're curious, help you make a decision if this is good for you or not. But when you're running a studio, you absolutely have to be solid in your plan. You have to be solid in your office skills, in your managerial skills. These aren't just your friends that you can kind of do whatever. Things have to be very, very clear. You have to realize you are someone's boss, and it is very difficult to have a really fun buddy relationship with someone and also be a good manager. Not impossible, but there's like, you can be a very, overbearing leader. You could be someone that is a leader that doesn't push enough. There's just a lot of leeway in there. But if you go into it knowing that, and again, I'm not saying don't work with your friends. I'm not saying
clearly
that.
As we are doing this right
here. We had some of the photographers we worked with were contract.
Okay.
And some were employees. And we actually, Peter and I used to speak about having employees and all the things that you need for that. Because when you have any sort of control over what they're doing, like what times they're working, whether they're going to do a wedding or not, if they don't have a choice if they're going to do this wedding or not, they have to be an employee. And photographers starting associate studios often will, or even just hiring out assistants, will think, oh, there's several things that could go wrong. You could say, oh, I'll just have an intern come do this for free. Having an intern, you can't do that. If someone is interning, when you get down to the legal necessities of this, if they are interning, then they are has to be only to learn. You cannot have them doing your work for you. If they're doing that, you either need to you have to pay them. So, and also ethically, do you really, like, who wants to work for free, you know?
Yep.
And I can't get into all the details of that, but if you're going to start, like, look into that. And then, you know, two, for an employee, when you have an employee, you are basically in charge of making sure this person is making a livable wage, that they're able to represent who you are, who you want to be to the world. If you want them to take every wedding that you book, then, so if you're going to have this consistent person that's there all the time and somebody's saying, hey, I want to book this person, and you expect them to take the job, then that has to be an employee. When you have expectations of somebody like that, they have to be an employee. And with that, you're going to have more paperwork, more tax laws. You're going to have to hire an accountant to do this unless you know all of this. And so there's a lot that goes into that. We did work with, we have worked with a couple photographers that we hired as like contractors. So they already had their photography skills and their style, and you know, but then they could go and book their own weddings. So maybe they end up getting really busy and you don't have them working for you anymore. And so that's like the pro and con. So there were a lot of things I loved about having an employee, having that set up, but also when it comes to profit, is everything all the work you're doing for this person, booking weddings, training them, is that what you want to be doing? Is that your life goal? Is to manage people? Is your life goal to manage people and to be willing to take loss of your own profit so that they can, you know, have a livable wage? And we absolutely did that. We sometimes did not pay ourselves to make sure we paid our employee. There were, you know, some months there that were really, really difficult. And it's something I didn't think of when I was like, I want a community. And so I'm just, you know, and that is like the really, really tough stuff about having associates. I have seen, there are some photographers that just, you know, I'm thinking about Joy Marie. I don't know if you know Joy. She's in the Nashville area. And she is just this phenomenal photographer that has always, I want to swear, but I'm not going to, always had her stuff together. And she has associates she works with, and she is like on top of it. Now, I haven't asked her, you know, really deep questions about it, but it just works really, really well for her. And she has the mind to do that. The way she works is amazing. I don't think she teaches this, but there are absolutely people that can run really wonderful associate studios. And we were very successful with our associate studio. It just became something that there are a lot of skills that I needed to have and I had to learn that I just did not enjoy. And
that's the great thing about being your own boss, is if it's not working for you anymore, it doesn't have to. You just quit it. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that kind of leads into my next question then, or, you know, topic, is that you just said there's a bunch of stuff you got to learn and you just kind of weren't there yet. So I know that you decided to shut down that associate studio. So can you talk a little bit about how you came to that decision? who was involved with that decision and just how that looked. Cause I feel like that is also something where we could be having somebody listening and watching, and maybe they're in the same situation where they're like, you know, I don't, this isn't what I want anymore. And they're trying to weigh those pros and cons and figure out if they really do want to pivot and do something different. So can you talk a little bit about how you came to that decision and everything you were feeling about that too?
Yeah. So really the decision that I had to make was, did I want to be a photographer anymore? So our associate studio was doing really well. At the time, I was doing some weddings, and I had my son a couple years ago, and that right there was a huge pivot for me. So I missed when he was 1, 2, 3. I missed so many events on the week, birthday parties. He was in preschool all the time, and I missed a lot of that part of life because then we had the weekends and I was gone, until midnight, and then I would come home. So that was really difficult. And at that time, Peter had started another job that he really loved and turned to, because photography was never his thing, even though we ran our photography studio together. So that was really the part where I was making the decision. Okay, do I still is this bringing me joy? Is this, am I actually helping our associates? What is going on? And for me, I felt like if I were to stop, I would be giving up. And this is being going deep, which I think a lot about these deeps, like whys. I think about this stuff, and I believe so much of my identity was wrapped up in being a photographer and a wedding. I was, in a lot of ways, it was like Whitney of Dove Wedding Photography. That's kind of who I was. And even still, my family, oh, this is Whitney, she's a photographer. So this was my identity, and I had taken it on and people had given it to me. So I thought, if I stop this, I'm not going to be real. I won't be respected, and I'll be seen as somebody giving up. And you hear that. And, you go and look at comments on people that pivot, oh, they're not doing photography anymore. They're just a cop out. Absolutely hate that way of thinking. Photography can be a part of you, but it should not be your full identity. So I will say that I should have stopped photography years before, not let myself get to that point where I just was miserable and I didn't actually enjoy what I was doing. And really, so when it comes down to how did I make that decision? My husband got a job in Minneapolis and we had to move.
Well, there we go.
So that made the decision for me. But when I did that, I said, okay, this is it. I do not want to start over. And I said, I am sick of running my own business. I'm sick of managing people. I want an office job where I don't have to think. I just sit there and fill out stuff. And I could go into a whole thing about pivoting to an office job like that. However, I realized I actually ended up starting working for Swift because I told Chris, I said, oh, I just want something I don't have to think. I want to be someone's assistant. And that's what I started off doing with Swift Galleries. And my mind is not made to do that stuff. So we would start brainstorming, and I'd have, creative ideas, and we would collaborate and talk. And so now, then I kind of have taken on more of a creative sort of role within Swift Galleries. So that's just, I know now too, going back to just being someone's assistant, I'm not going to be able to do that. I just love making things and doing stuff on my own too much.
That's really big. So basically, for everybody out there who's listening and watching, Chris from Swift Galleries, we all know him. We're all connected to him. So what I'm wondering then, Whitney, is it that had you talked to Chris about your move and where you were at, and then you kind of started going with this? Or was it that, like, how did you and Chris even start talking about the possibility of you working with him and Adrianne and Cyrus for Swift?
It was the most random. They had so Chris and Adrianne sold all their stuff. They're in a camper traveling. We hadn't seen them in so long because they had moved to Colorado before. And they were coming through. I had at one point when I knew they were traveling, I said, there's this great place, Grand Marais, Minnesota, which you guys, Grand Marais, look it up. Beautiful, the best place on the shores of Lake Superior. They said, okay. And it just so happened we planned a trip at the same time. Well, let's meet up and hang out. We haven't seen each other in forever. We're like hanging out. And I'm like, oh, just randomly. I'm just looking for a job where I really don't have to, think too much. And this was around COVID. And so I had an office job that had stopped. And I just mentioned it. It was literally like that. And then I get, in the conversations, he's like, well, have you thought of working with us? Oh, maybe. And then a couple of weeks later, we're having conversations and here I am. So, yes. And I will say, so I am in a position where I do work with Chris, but he also is like, my manager, I was like an employee for him. And he is absolutely was like great. I mean, still is. Like, I love collaborating him. Everything you want, like, and somebody to work with. So I know I was just going off on all the hard stuff. I'm not talking about Chris.
That makes sense. That's it's I find it fascinating too, where, when you do decide that you need to pivot, because I think all of us have pivoted with what we've done. And I do find it fascinating because, like you said, so much of your identity is pulled into what you were doing and who you were. And it does make you question a lot of things about yourself and where you want to go. Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of the reason photographers pivot is because it's just, you go into it kind of expecting one thing because you've taken classes and it's fun to be creative. And then all of a sudden when you're doing it as a business, it's just different. It shifts. Mm-hmm. You're not just being creative for yourself. You're having to be creative for somebody else and produce work that somebody else likes. Yes. And I think that can pull away some of our creativity because, at least personally speaking, I'm not maybe going to try some things creatively if I feel like the client is not going to be into it. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of snowballs to that effect. So I'm wondering for you, Whitney, since you were like, you know what, don't want to do this, just want an office job. What brought back that spark? Because I know that now you are taking photos, but it's not, you're not like taking photos for clients. Yeah. So what brought back that spark and that desire to create again with photography?
So I did not want to touch a camera for maybe 6 months. It felt like forever, like no desire. Moving to Minneapolis, I'm in this brand new place. The scenery I'd never seen, like the landscape is so different. The culture is so different here than like Nashville. And I sold all my Canon gear and I bought a Micro Four Thirds Olympus camera that I could just stick in my pocket. And I would just go explore these new places in the city and in Grand Marais. We go there every year. And would just take photos of things that I thought were pretty. That was basically it. If this is pretty, I'm going to take a photo of it. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I didn't have some big project in mind. I just let myself enjoy looking at the world around me and taking images of it. And that absolutely helped bring back that spark. I didn't even post. I would post some. I didn't post everything. I didn't have a plan. And eventually I ended up, and this was really a fun project for me. It wasn't like a whole business, but I created this advent calendar that I ended up selling on Etsy that was made up of photographic prints. And I went through all this. I have this huge catalog of this work that I just enjoy myself. And I created this advent calendar. I just did something really, really creative and different. And I sold it on Etsy for Christmas. And actually, for what it was, it did really well. And so I just did something that came from my own mind. I wasn't following instructions. I wasn't copying anybody. I wasn't trying to pose anyone. And that really, I guess, was like very healing for me more than anything, more than making money. And I think that if I had been doing that while I was photographing clients, I would not have gotten to the point that I was at. And for the last maybe 6 years of doing wedding photography, I never did anything for myself, ever. It was all work. I was always like, okay, I need to do X, Y, Z. I would feel guilty taking time for myself. I did not do anything at all. And I think it's so important as photographers, and I love to encourage photographers, and I want to encourage you, if you're listening to this, take some time to do photographs for yourself. You do not have to print them. The act of walking around, looking at things, seeing what you like, not thinking about what someone else likes, not worrying about if it's going to make you money, and just doing it for yourself. It makes such a big difference. And I think it can keep you from burning out.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is that you've always, before your business, during your business, after your business, you've always been artistic and creative and wanted to be around people and, just uplifting and all of that. And the things that I think set some photographers apart, everybody could have the same camera and, take similar pictures. But I think there are so many things about you that set you apart from other people in the area. But those things got overshadowed by all of the business side of things and all of the hard stuff. And that's what I love about this podcast is the whole point of this is for us to say, this didn't work. So this is what I would do different. And we'll talk about, we'll fill the newsletter with productivity things and tips about outsourcing and whatever it is that we can, tips to take time for yourself and love the art again. So that hopefully our listeners don't get to the point of wanting to pivot out of it, or if they are at that point, that they could find a love for it again, whether they continue on in business or whether they just continue taking photos personally. We just want people to love photography and have it, work for them in their lifestyle.
Yes, absolutely. I 100% agree that, that's what I want to see people do. And I think, I sounded very negative about associates, and I don't want to come across like that, because there were some absolutely amazing things that were able to happen. And I had some great connections and made some great friendships. My sister actually she's a teacher in Georgia, and she was an associate of ours for a while. And I would even get to fly down to Georgia and shoot with her. And it was so great.
Oh, that's fun.
And doing what I did, I did a lot of things right with associates, and I learned a lot, but it did not align with who I am. I was doing it. Eventually I was doing it because of expectations that I had set on me, set on by other people, that I set on myself. And it wasn't me. And I was just kind of trying to conform in a way, I think is one way to think of it. And so if you're listening to this, what I hope you take away from it is that you can pivot how you want and what feels right to you. You do not have to do what every other photographer on Instagram is doing. You do not have to chase after XYZ clients. You can have a business that aligns with what you're good at, that aligns with where your heart is, and you can be profitable with that. You can absolutely be profitable with that. You do not have to build something gigantic to do that. So it's very easy for us to let self-doubt in our own ideas and kind of striving to make things perfect all the time for everyone, and that we lose sight of who we are. Yeah. And that's no good for anybody.
No,
it's not good for you. It's not good for anybody else. And if you decide running a photography business is not right for you, you just want to do it as a hobby, do not feel shame in that. You are still a photographer. Mm-hmm. You are still a photographer. You do not need credentials to call yourself a photographer.
I love that. I love that a lot. So really, if you were to do things over again, knowing what you know now, like what are one or two things that where maybe you would have changed earlier, something you would have done instead? I think people would be very curious to hear, given all that you've gone through and where you are now and how you were feeling during that time. What would you do different?
So if where I am now, I would do a lot more collaborative projects where I would work with other photographers with their own business to do something unique. Like this, like the edit. This is, for me right now, even this fulfills this like collaboration on creating something, whatever that is. So I would focus more of my energy on that rather than trying to build a studio with employees and everything. I would have part of why, of course, money always comes into it. We're businesses.
Yeah.
I'm not just like, oh, let's just whatever and not think about money. Absolutely. Money comes into it. I would have worked harder on getting my processes in place to make consistent in-person sales. And this is my like Swift Galleries sort of spiel, but it's absolutely what I would have done. I always did in-person sales, and sometimes we'd have great sales, sometimes nothing. And it was because I did not have a really good system in place that I focused, really focused to learn it best. And I would have done that because I could have actually increased my revenue so much just by taking all that energy and making something bigger rather than like just really focusing on the clients that I did have. Mm-hmm. So that would be a huge thing I would do. And then I would absolutely keep making sure that I had time to pursue my art, whether it's photography or even something else that I do for myself. That would be a priority. And even now I do make that a priority now. So
that's awesome. You've been able to do that. That's really cool. So like at this point now, what does a typical day look like for you? For me. Well, like where you've shifted and where you're at now, like what is a typical day? Cause I know that, you've mentioned that you work with Chris and Adrianne, and Cyrus too. Never want to forget him over at Swift Galleries. Yes. He does so much. So where are you at now with your business? What do you do? Yeah. What does a typical day look like for you?
So right now with Swift Galleries, I'm doing a lot of content. I'm working on Instagram. I'm really focusing in on doing consistent social media. So that's kind of my goal, and I'm getting there. I'm somebody that has a million ideas, and it's very hard for me to focus on one. So that is what I liked about doing weddings, and why I just did. It just helped me like, okay, this is it. This is the one thing. And then in terms of art making, I am just simply exploring different avenues for myself. I do still do photography. I still do some sessions. It's very hard. Even when you move, it's kind of hard. People find out you're a photographer. It's hard, like, not to kind of carry that around.
Yeah.
And I even still photograph some weddings even after I moved. Like, I flew back to Nashville. So I finally, and I still remember there was somebody that had like messaged me about a wedding, and I actually had to say no. And I felt really weird. So I still get to do some of that, but I'm still most of my work right now is with Swift Galleries and creating different business ideas. With Swift Galleries, I get to talk to a lot of photographers and kind of see where they're at, what they're working on in their business, and try to help them brainstorm and figure out kind of maybe where they should focus, what they can do. I help teach them to do in-person sales because we have just such an incredible process. And that is, I love it. I love photographers. They're so creative. And I just talked with a photographer yesterday, actually Marco'd the two of you about him, somebody that's been in the business for close to 50 years, maybe 30 years. I don't know. A long time. I'm sorry. And it was just fascinating hearing where he is now, where he's been, what he's working on. And, he just I love talking to him because he bought one of the very first digital cameras that cost $30,000. And
I just can't even imagine.
Oh my gosh. But that got him a gig that he has had for the past 30 years. He works one day a year, makes $8,000.
I love it.
For this one gig because he had that camera. So I'm sure there's a lesson in there, maybe somewhere. Just buy biggest and best and don't worry about it.
Right. There you go.
So yeah. But it helps me, that's how I know a lot about I keep up with what's going on in the photography industry and what's going on, what's working in marketing, what's working for photographers. What are the labs up to? So I, kind of have this wealth of knowledge of kind of where everything's at. And I hope I can be helpful when I'm sharing this stuff that I'm learning from all of you that I get to talk to.
No, it's awesome.
I'm already learning.
Right? Exactly. I was going to say, Erin, I feel like Erin and I learned so much. I feel like AI, Whitney, you basically came to the table with, the AI, at least the first part of the AI episodes has aired at this point in time. The newsletter went out this week, and Erin and I know we learned so much about AI. So yes, I love it. But this has been awesome, Whitney. I hope that everybody was able to just really soak in what you had to say about, especially the part about doing things for yourself. I feel like that is where we all tend to struggle, because it's just so hard when you're running a business to, I think, carve out that time and create it for yourself. But obviously very important to remember what got us all to where we are. Our creative side needs to be nourished and taken care of. And I think we neglect it more than, we think we do. When we're not, consciously consciously working on it and setting time apart to actually get it done. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Really hope that you enjoyed our interview with Whitney. Erin's interview is going to probably be next at some point, right, Erin?
Yes.
I love it. It's so fun. So make sure you subscribe to The Edit Weekly, our weekly newsletter, where we share so much information about different parts of owning a photography business and talking with awesome photographers who have so much to share and just a wealth of knowledge for everybody. So you can go to theeditweekly.com, sign up for that. You can also go to our Instagram account, The Edit Weekly, and check us out on there as well. And we can't wait to see you next week with a new newsletter issue and a new podcast episode. So we'll see you then. Bye.
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 And done.
I forgot to bring my